A figure emerges from the luxury vehicle at the palace entrance. It's Senator JD Vance, who doesn't even wait for umbrella coverage, one hand fixing his dark blue coat while the other straightens the miniature stars and stripes on his jacket lapel as he surveys the courtyard with an expression suggesting he's about as enthralled as someone watching amateur theater. "Tell me again why we're treating this like some medieval role-playing game," he grumbles to the young assistant beside him, who has mastered that anxious smile people display when their superior is being challenging in public view. They had arrived as members of a cross-party group meeting with high-ranking British officials to discuss defense partnerships and mutual global interests, the diplomatic essentials. But to Vance, all this pomp with the uniforms, the musical accompaniment, and the choreographed movements seemed more theatrical performance than genuine diplomacy. Several steps behind him, another staff member whispers to a colleague, "Be careful, remember the fallout from his comments about royal protocol in that previous interview." As the delegation begins heading toward the western courtyard for their official tour, Vance accelerates his pace, his footwear crushing against the small stones with what appears to be intentional insolence while a palace representative recites historical information about the guard-changing ceremony, though Vance is clearly only partially attentive. "You know what doesn't enhance military capability," he mutters just loudly enough for the aide at his side to hear. "Pageantry. We have actual combat soldiers while they maintain what amounts to a decorative team in elaborate outfits." The aide wisely remains silent in response. Just ahead, a pair of British military officers in complete ceremonial attire stand prepared to welcome the American visitors. Vance offers them a brief, almost dismissive acknowledgement before his gaze drifts toward the distant figures of royal guards positioned throughout the courtyard, their uniforms brilliantly visible against the dull morning. Those iconic bright red coats, the towering bearskin hats, weapons held with flawless, almost mechanical precision. It's as if history decided to preserve itself in living form. To most observers, it represents an impressive display of tradition and discipline, but to Vance it resembles a museum exhibition that somehow secured employment benefits. He releases a soft sigh, observing his breath transform into vapor in the moist atmosphere. "Let's just complete this ceremonial display," he mutters. The irony was that he had absolutely no awareness that the defining moment of his entire visit was merely a few steps away. At the courtyard's western boundary, Lance Corporal Edward Staithm stood immobile as though he'd been planted there, like a sculpture carved directly from British military heritage. His adorned in the unmistakable Queen's Guard uniform, scarlet jacket pressed to immaculate perfection with edges so sharp they could slice paper, the imposing bearskin hat resting on his head as if weightless, and white-gloved hands positioned on his gleaming SA-80 rifle. The man hasn't shifted position for over 60 minutes, not a single movement, not even an eye blink, nothing. His vision remains fixed forward across the palace grounds, completely unreadable and utterly unshakable, despite the gentle London precipitation forming droplets on his shoulders. He might as well be constructed of granite. To any casual tourist passing by, he likely appears as an expensive prop, but to informed observers, this man is anything but decorative. You see, Staithm, age 31, born and raised in Devon, comes from one of those heritage military families where service extends through generations back to the World War I trenches. His completed deployments in Iraq and served in Estonia during combined NATO exercises. This isn't merely any soldier. He's a consummate professional whom other military personnel reference in stories, renowned for judgment that's razor-sharp under pressure and discipline verging on superhuman. His selection for ceremonial duties wasn't some comfortable reward for good conduct. He earned every aspect of it through merit. Beyond the barrier ropes, a group of British veterans is gathering. One man in his 60s wearing a dark blazer completely adorned with medals leans toward a younger companion saying, "See that guard? That's Staithm," nodding subtly toward the motionless figure. He maintained position during that chaotic situation near Fallujah, never wavering when communications failed and everything descended into chaos around them. Tourists are capturing photographs continuously while a group of school children observe the guards with that mixture of wonder and puzzlement typical of young people, quietly asking questions of their teacher. Near the crowd's edge stands a man holding an umbrella, something respectfully attentive in his stance, the type of person who recognizes precisely what's unfolding and ups to witness rather than disrupt. Then JD Vance notices him. The American senator had paused midway through the courtyard, half listening to some staff member's logistical update regarding their schedule, but something about Staithm captures his attention. Not the uniform, which is already ridiculed, not the weapon, it's that complete unwavering stillness, that total lack of acknowledgment that seems to particularly irritate him. That guy isn't even blinking, Vance comments, tilting his head as though examining a strange exhibit at a carnival sideshow. His voice isn't particularly booming, but it's sufficiently audible that several heads turn. One of the British officers conducting the tour makes a subtle shift as if preparing to intervene but then refrains. Vance reduces his speed, deviating slightly from the designated route, his gaze remaining fixed on Staithm like a hunter who's just identified intriguing prey. Nobody speaks, but the onlookers, especially those veterans, begin watching more intently now. Something in the atmosphere changes. You can sense it, tension, quiet yet absolutely unmistakable, beginning to accumulate like electrical charge before a thunderstorm. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Edward Staithm continues exactly as before, completely undisturbed by the moment yet somehow positioned precisely at its center. Vance's walking pattern transforms into this casual, almost arrogant swagger as he approaches Lance Corporal Staithm, his entire support staff trailing behind, visibly uncertain whether they should follow or pretend they haven't observed their boss deviating from protocol. The senator wears this thin performative smile that barely conceals the condescension bubbling just beneath his exterior as he begins circling Staithm very deliberately, hands clasped behind his back like a curious museum visitor examining an attraction. "Well, this is certainly remarkable," Vance announces loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. It's as if someone wound him up mechanically and forgot to activate the movement function. A few nervous laughs ripple through the crowd, but you can observe several British spectators tensing noticeably. One woman actually lowers her camera, her expression quickly souring. A man wearing a tweed cap mutters under his breath, "Absolutely disgraceful behavior." But Vance is merely warming up. "Explain something to me," he says to a palace staff member hovering nearby. "Does he ever actually move?" The poor assistant blinks in confusion, beginning to explain something about ceremonial protocol before Vance interrupts mid-explanation. "No, seriously, just look at this individual," he actually laughs at his own remark. "They inform me he's a combat soldier. He appears more like he's auditioning for a position at Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, if you ask my opinion." Behind him, that retired British colonel with the medal-covered blazer narrows his eyes but remains silent, arms crossing over his chest. He recognizes exactly what game is being played here. Vance isn't simply being disrespectful, he's challenging boundaries, prodding at symbols he doesn't comprehend or perhaps simply doesn't care to respect. Staithm maintains absolute stillness, not even a flicker of recognition. Vance steps even closer, now completely violating that invisible boundary between visitor and guard, the one every tourist instinctively knows not to cross. His voice drops slightly, pitched just above a whisper but still sharp enough to penetrate the gentle drizzle. "Have you ever participated in actual combat, Corporal, or are you merely here to look decorative for the visitors?" Still nothing, not a single movement. Vance's smile broadens. That uniform must be uncomfortable, especially that headwear. What exactly is that thing anyway? Who designed it? Napoleon's fashion consultant. More tourists are turning to observe now. One young American couple exchanges uncomfortable glances, the wife whispering, "Is he permitted to approach that closely?" Her boyfriend merely shakes his head, appearing increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, I understand tradition," Vance continues, raising his voice slightly to ensure he has an audience. "But this exemplifies what happens when symbolism replaces actual combat preparedness. You people dress up discipline in wool and decorative buttons and label it military service." He actually leans closer now, making a show of inspecting the stitching on Staitham's sleeve. "I'd wager this garment constitutes a fire hazard as well." A reaction moves through the watching crowd. Even the school children, sensing something inappropriate, have grown silent. From a distance, one palace guide begins stepping forward, but a senior officer makes a discreet gesture instructing him to wait. Vance positions himself directly in Staitham's line of sight now, a clear, unmistakable violation of palace visitor etiquette. He's excessively close, too casual, and far too loud. You know, in the Marine Corps, Vance announces, addressing no specific person but ensuring everyone can hear, we train soldiers to adapt, to respond to threats, not stand motionless posing for tourist photographs. Still, Staithm doesn't move, not a single inch. The only sound is that persistent London drizzle gently tapping on stone and fabric. You're genuinely not going to break character, are you? Vance remarks, almost sounding impressed. All that training, all that preparation, merely to impersonate a statue in the rain. He takes another half step forward. Come on, men, blink, twitch, hell, offer me a salute, something, anything. Staithm remains perfectly motionless, and somehow that stillness is beginning to feel like its own form of authority, a presence stronger than any verbal confrontation could ever be. The retired colonel leans toward a nearby tourist, commenting just loudly enough, his provoking a soldier who's witnessed more actual combat than he ever will. But Vance can't perceive it or refuses to. However, everyone else is starting to recognize that a boundary has definitely been crossed, and that silence, far from representing submission, is becoming the most powerful response possible. Now Vance's entire posture changes. What began as mockery is transforming into something more hostile, an assertion of hierarchy, of rank. He squares his shoulders and positions himself directly before Lance Corporal Edward Staithm, deliberately obstructing the guard's forward line of sight completely. To anyone unfamiliar with protocol, it might appear as curiosity, but to those knowledgeable about palace procedures, this represents a clear violation. Guards are never to be approached this closely, never to be obstructed, and absolutely never deliberately provoked. Yet here stands JD Vance, inches from a motionless soldier, his expression somewhere between challenge and command. I'm JD Vance, he announces more loudly now, clearly addressing the gathering crowd as much as the man before him. United States Senator. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and I have worn a military uniform myself. There's a calculated pause, just sufficient for nearby tourists to turn and truly pay attention. I believe a certain level of respect is appropriate, don't you think? Absolute stillness from Staithm. Vance touches his lapel pin with 2 fingers, that small American flag catching the light. In the military, the genuine military, we salute rank. That's not exclusively American tradition, that's alliance protocol. He tilts his head slightly as if amused by his own boldness, then adds with unmistakable authority. And since we're allies, Corporal, I believe it's time you demonstrated proper military courtesy. He gives a short, sharp nod, then delivers the words as if issuing a battlefield command, salute me. The atmosphere practically crystallizes with tension, several genuine gasps escape from the onlookers. One woman whispers, he didn't actually just say that. A father quietly pulls his child back behind the rope boundary as if they are witnessing something potentially explosive. Staithm doesn't move, not a single muscle. Vance maintains his position. I'm giving you a direct order, soldier, he continues, actually pointing now, not quite making contact but close enough to make several bystanders visibly flinch. Salute me right now. Complete silence follows, even the tourists are holding their breath. The guard's 1,000-yard stare remains unflinching. A teenage boy near the back mutters to his friend, is this guy actually being serious? Then Vance commits his final, critical mistake. He moves even closer, so near that his shoulder actually makes contact with the edge of Staitham's rifle stock. He leans in slightly, chin elevated, eyes narrowing to slits. Do you comprehend what chain of command signifies, don't you? From the sidelines, that retired British colonel exhales audibly through his nose, commenting just loudly enough, now he's crossed the line, that's a definite violation. Several tourists instinctively reach for their phones, then hesitate. The entire scene has become tense in a manner that feels almost sacred, and suddenly nobody wants to intrude by recording it. Vance's voice drops lower, the words clearly intended to intimidate. Where I come from, disobeying a superior officer results in disciplinary action or worse. Statham's response is nothing, but somehow that nothing carries more significance than any shouted reply ever could. He hasn't saluted, hasn't flinched, and yet in his own way, he's answered, just not in any language Vance knows how to interpret. The American delegation has halted farther along the walkway, now watching this confrontation with tense expressions and carefully neutral faces. Even Vance's own aides appear noticeably uncomfortable. The moment has stretched to its absolute breaking point, and all eyes are focused on the man who hasn't moved an inch. The change is subtle, so subtle that if you blinked you might have missed it, but to everyone watching, it registers like thunder. Lance Corporal Edward Staithm moves. Not a twitch, not a flinch. This is deliberate, measured, precise action. His white-gloved left hand rises, calm, controlled, methodical, and with one fluid motion, he removes JD Vance's arm from where it's hovering far too close to his rifle. The movement isn't aggressive, isn't angry, it's simply definitive. The crowd inhales collectively, you can actually hear it. Then comes the voice, firm, low, polished like ceremonial steel. "Sir," Staithm says, eyes still fixed forward in that perfect ceremonial gaze, "you are in direct violation of Standing Palace Protocol 2 Bravo regarding interference with ceremonial personnel." He hasn't shouted, hasn't even elevated his tone, but those words resonate across the courtyard like a drill sergeant's command. Vance actually blinks, momentarily thrown off balance, not just by the response itself but by its absolute clarity. He had anticipated silence or perhaps deference, not this. Physical encroachment upon an armed ceremonial guard, Staithm continues, each word precise as a surgical incision, constitutes a security infraction. "I must respectfully instruct you to return to the designated visitor's path." The words are evidently memorized, extracted directly from military procedure, but there's nothing mechanical about his delivery. This is composed, unshakable humanity. The veterans in the crowd straighten instinctively, spines becoming rigid as if responding to a familiar command. Vance attempts to regain control, squaring his shoulders. "So now British guards are lecturing senators?" Staitham's tone doesn't alter even fractionally. "No, sir, I do not lecture, I execute my duty to the crown." Gasps ripple through the crowd again. Then from somewhere in the back, one person begins applauding, then another. The applause starts hesitantly, as though people aren't certain if it's appropriate. One elderly man simply nods silently, his eyes developing that glassy appearance of pride mixed with ancient memories. Vance opens his mouth to respond, then appears to reconsider. Instead, he takes a step backward, just one pace. It's not an apology, but it's definitely a retreat. His expression remains stern, still defiant, but something in his bearing has shifted. This encounter hasn't proceeded according to his expectations. Somewhere, an American tourist whispers to her companion, "Wait, I thought they weren't permitted to speak." "They are not," replies a British local, speaking softly, "unless someone transgresses the boundaries." Vance's aides are now cautiously approaching their superior, one touching his elbow gently, murmuring, "Sir, we should probably rejoin the group." But Vance doesn't immediately move, his gaze remains fixed not on Staitham's eyes, which continue dutifully focused ahead, but on the man himself, as if trying to decipher what just transpired, attempting to reclaim a moment that's already vanished. Then comes the concluding statement. Staithm, already resuming his perfect guard posture, adds with surgical precision, "This isn't America, Senator." The words are quiet, almost gentle, but everyone hears them. Several people actually break into open applause now. One British teenager whispers to his friend, "That was absolutely ice cold." Even the children seem to perceive that something significant just occurred, something that won't appear in any tourist guidebook or be explained during any palace tour. The silence returns, but this time it belongs entirely to Staithm. Vance retreats fully now, his jaw set in a rigid line, lips compressed together. For all his rank, all his bluster, all his presence, he suddenly appears very, very diminished. And Edward Staithm, his already resumed perfect attention posture, as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more significant than a passing breeze, as if silence once again constitutes the most devastating response conceivable. Just as the tension reaches its absolute peak, a new figure emerges from the palace side entrance, moving with that particular kind of calm, deliberate purpose that immediately demands attention. Captain Eliza Montgomery, Palace Protocol Officer, decorated logistics commander, and former attaché to NATO's Joint Command, creates an impressive silhouette as she traverses the damp courtyard. She's tall, sharp-featured, her uniform so immaculately pressed it appears it could maintain its shape independently, Everything about her radiates that distinctly British authority, quiet, efficient, and absolutely immovable. "Senator Vance," she says evenly, not even interrupting her stride as she approaches, "may I have a brief conversation?" Vance turns, probably anticipating defensiveness, perhaps even an apology. What he receives instead is something far more disarming, perfect civility with steel running directly through its core. "I understand there may have been some confusion regarding ceremonial protocol," she continues, making this gentle sweeping gesture with an open palm that guides him several paces away from the onlookers. "It's not a command, but it's also very clearly not optional," Vance follows, attempting to project composure though his aides are shadowing him like anxious puppies. Montgomery doesn't elevate her voice, doesn't grandstand. Instead, she speaks with that clipped precision of someone who's diffused far worse situations behind closed NATO doors. "Palace guards are sworn to the crown," she explains, her tone conversational yet firm. "Their authority while on duty supersedes that of all visiting personnel, including elected officials from allied nations." She pauses just long enough for that information to register, then adds with perfect timing, "including senators." You can actually observe Vance's eyebrows twitch. "Lance Corporal Staithm," she continues, nodding back toward the still motionless guard, "is not merely a ceremonial figure, he's a combat-decorated infantryman. His most recent deployment was in Mali under Operation New Barricade. Before that, joint operations with U.S. Marines in Anbar Province, Bronze Service Star, mentioned in dispatches twice. Several of your American commanders have described him as unshakable under enemy fire." She allows those words to register before delivering the concluding point. "He's not disregarding you, Senator, he's protecting you by maintaining the discipline of his position." Vance's jaw works silently, processing this new information. A second figure approaches, Brigadier Alan Beaksley, commander of the Household Division. His uniform displays fewer ribbons than Montgomery's, but there's something in his expression, that quiet gravitas of decades of actual service that commands immediate respect. "Senator," Beaksley says with formal politeness, "these guards aren't performers in costumes, they're combat soldiers trained to transition seamlessly between battlefield conditions and ceremonial responsibility without hesitation. That kind of duality requires more than mere physical endurance, it demands principle." Vance's voice, when it finally emerges, is noticeably subdued. In the United States, soldiers salute elected leadership, its fundamental chain of command. Montgomery nods, acknowledging his statement. And in the United Kingdom, soldiers on ceremonial duty do not break formation for any reason except an immediate threat or direct protocol violation. Saluting an interfering civilian, even one of high office, would itself constitute a breach of protocol. Brigadier Beaksley adds, his tone measured, "What might appear as stubborn silence is actually one of the highest forms of professional discipline we require from our service members." He remained composed, measured and respectful even under deliberate provocation. Behind them, the crowd is beginning to disperse gradually, the incident already transforming into whispered conversations and meaningful glances. A few people linger, still observing Staithm, whose perfect stillness has returned as if nothing had ever disturbed it. Montgomery softens her tone slightly. "These situations are easily misinterpreted, Senator. Many visitors make similar assumptions, but there's a reason these men are entrusted to represent the crown before millions." Vance exhales slowly. He doesn't apologize, his pride prevents that, but he doesn't press further either. Something has shifted. Whether it's comprehension, embarrassment, or simple political calculation isn't entirely apparent, but he nods just once, then turns and begins walking back toward his delegation, falling several deliberate paces behind his aides. And behind him, the British officers remain motionless, watching, steady and silent as the scarlet-coated sentinel in the courtyard. The rain has diminished into an almost imperceptible mist now, the kind that adheres to overcoats and renders everything slightly blurred around the edges. The American delegation has reassembled near the palace gates, their diplomatic vehicles waiting discreetly behind the manicured hedge. JD Vance stands slightly separated from the others, saying little, his jaw still set in that defensive angle of someone who recognizes they've miscalculated. He glances backward just once, across the courtyard where Lance Corporal Edward Staithm remains exactly as he's been throughout, unmoved, unshaken, that scarlet silhouette standing against the grey stonework like something carved from British military tradition itself. His rifle remains at precisely the identical angle, his gaze fixed at that eternal 45-degree orientation, not focusing on any specific individual yet somehow taking in everything. Vance hesitates, something about that unwavering steadiness makes him look again. Near the rope boundary, a small cluster of British veterans has remained. One of them, a distinguished-looking gentleman in a navy blazer, his chest adorned with campaign ribbons indicating extended service, steps forward without ceremony. He approaches Staitham's position respectfully, halting just beyond the barrier, maintaining that careful distance demonstrating his understanding of protocols. Then slowly, deliberately, he raises his weathered hand and delivers a crisp, textbook-perfect salute. Staithm doesn't respond, doesn't move, but the gesture doesn't require acknowledgment, it's not about receiving something in return. Another figure follows, a younger man, possibly retired military himself, offering the same silent tribute. Then, in what might be the most unexpected moment of all, one of the American security detail, an older Marine judging by his bearing, exchanges a knowing look with a colleague, steps forward, and adds his own salute to the quiet ceremony. One by one, others join in, not in protest, not in defiance, just in recognition of something that transcends national boundaries, a soldier's respect for another soldier's discipline. Vance observes all of this unfolding. He doesn't speak. For once, he seems to comprehend this isn't his moment to fill with commentary. His aides shift uncomfortably, but nobody hurries him. This isn't the kind of scene you interrupt. Staithm maintains his post, unchanging. There are no speeches, no formal apologies, no social media moments, just silence, and somehow in that silence, more gets communicated than in all the words that preceded it. Finally, Vance turns away, moving toward the waiting vehicle. He opens the door himself, not waiting for anyone to assist him, and slides inside. The door closes with that expensive muffled sound of diplomatic transport. The motorcade begins departing, its tail lights reflecting briefly in the palace windows like fading embers. And still there, on the ancient stonework of Buckingham Palace's courtyard, stands a single guard in red, unmoved by ceremony, unshaken by ego, his silence making a statement more powerful than any salute ever could. Do you believe JD Vance warranted receiving a salute, or did he receive precisely what he deserved? And here's the larger question. How should international guests conduct themselves when encountering traditions that aren't their own? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. We genuinely read every single response. If this narrative resonated with you, if it prompted you to think differently about respect and tradition, please activate that like button, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell so you never miss tomorrow's upload. Know someone who would benefit from viewing this? Someone who might appreciate a reminder about respect? Share it with them. And if you're interested in more powerful moments just like this one, check out these other videos appearing on your screen right now. We'll meet you tomorrow, same time, with another story that demonstrates one simple truth. Respect isn't about rank, it's about knowing when to maintain silence.